Are you considering flipping land? Well, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to do it to make sure you're fully protected in that process. All right, let's get started. Okay, so think about land flipping. It's kind of similar to flipping real estate as well, homes. It's just a different approach you take to making money. One, of course, is raw land. One is improved property. But the thing about land flipping is there's also opportunities, but there's also maybe increased risk when it comes to flipping land. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves to the greatest extent as possible, because I think there's more liability with land flipping than there is real estate because of the perceptions that can come from a buyer or the allegations that can be made if it doesn't work out the way they anticipated. So for land flippers, it might be as safe as you might think when it comes to moving that property. The other thing is, during your holding time, what risk do you take on if somebody is using that property and you don't even know that somebody's out there on it and they injure themselves? Yeah, their liability can come from that. More particularly, let me show you what I'm referring to. And this really forms the basis for land flippers as to why asset protection is so important. We have a client that owned a lot in a development. And so was it just a plain old lot, owned it outright, and was planning on flipping it to a developer at some point in time. Well, some kids went out there on some four-wheelers, and they were cruising around on these four-wheelers, and they crashed into one another, and they injured themselves. They turned around and they sued our client for the injuries they sustained. And they said it's because his land wasn't posted, no trespassing, that this individual known or should have known that kids would be out there on four-wheelers, who's going to know that, riding around, and that's the result of their injuries, therefore he's liable. Now, once he got sued, of course, who did he call? He called Anderson and said, what can I do to protect myself? Unfortunately, in that case, there's nothing we can do for you. But going forwards, we can definitely help protect you when you're holding real property. And so for land flippers, stuff like this can happen. Maybe you've seen other stories where people are out hunting on property and they fall out of a tree and they shoot themselves. Yes, it was the case out of Pennsylvania. And then they sued the owner of the property. So I don't want to see that happen to you. And if you're flipping property, what we want to do is we want to mitigate risk from lawsuits, and we want to mitigate risk from taxes. Both of those can really impair our ability to grow our land flipping business. So the first entity that you want to look at when you're going to be flipping is you want to create either an LLC or an Inc. I'll probably tend to lean more towards a limited liability company for land flippers than I would a traditional corp, unless of course you feel that, hey, this is a new thing for me. I'm going to go out and I'm going to obtain a lot of education on how to do this. And if I decide I don't like it and I want to write off the cost of that education, the travel to get this education to learn how to flip real estate, I would go with an Inc. because we can set that up so you can write that off. If you're not concerned about doing that, then I would set it up as a limited liability company. Now, if you want to understand that in more detail, check out a video I wrote or I recently put together on S versus C Corporation, Inc. versus LLC. It goes into detail on that particular topic right there. So now I got my business set up. The next thing I want to look at is how am I going to tax it? S versus C. So now you got to say S versus C. So I'll set up an LLC, and I'd probably set up this company originally. Maybe you start with an S corporation if you're just getting started, and then you convert to a C, or if you're in a higher income tax bracket, maybe a C corporation makes more sense for you if you want to keep flipping property, you want to keep turning those profits. So if this is something where you're going to do a lot of volume activity in, and you see yourself flipping 10, 15, 20 parcels of land a year, I'd probably go with the C corporation for this overall business. Because the thing about land flipping why I'm starting off with an entity treated as a corporation is you're going to be taxed as a dealer when you flip property. And so when you're flipping land, if you're taxed as a dealer, if you made over the course of the year $200,000, all of that is going to be subject to what we call self-employment tax, FICA, FUTA, that type of stuff, which is 15.4%. And then it does drop down after I think it's $120,000. But my point is that by engaging in this activity in your own name, you're going to be treated as a sole proprietor. Now, if you did it through an S corporation, that $200,000, it's still dealer property in an S corporation. It's still active income, but you can control how that income hits you. And again, watch that video as I explain that in more detail. But the fact of the matter is that if I'm going to keep turning that money and keep building it, the C corporation is taxed at a flat 21%. And so that really helps me out if I'm in a higher tax bracket. If I was in a 30% tax bracket and I made $200,000 in flipping real estate or flipping land, I'm going to be paying $60,000 in taxes. Whereas if it was a C Corp, it would be $42,000. So I have more money left over to buy property. So that's the first entity you start with. You get that base entity set up. Then the actual land purchases should be set up in separate LLCs. All right, so I'm going to set up these separate land purchases in different limited liability companies. Now, here's something to consider when you're doing this. What you might want to do when you start out buying the land is start off with the LLC. Maybe if you go with this S Corp, start off with the LLC in your own name. So if I had an S Corp that I was flipping with, and I found a piece of land over here that I wanted to buy, I might do this. I might set up an LLC, which I am the owner of to begin with, to buy the land in that limited liability company. The reason why I would consider doing that is if that land has mineral rights, oil and gas interests under the ground, and I want to split off those mineral rights. So I'm going to sell the surface rights, but not what's in the ground. So if I want to hold on to the stuff that's in the ground, then I'm not going to want to keep that in my land flipping business. I'm going to want to strip that out and keep it separate. So what I would do is first get this property prepped. So I would buy the property, close on the property in this LLC, strip out the mineral rights to a mineral LLC that I would hold over here. So you only need one LLC for all your mineral rights. So you can hold mineral rights on, 50 parcels of property. It's not going to matter because there's no liability. So you hold all that stuff in this one. And so now you're just left with surface rights over here in this limited liability company. So once I've done all of that, then I can take my LLC that holds the property and I can transfer the interest into the Corp that I've set up. The LLC taxes and S Corp. I can move it in there, or a C Corp for that matter. You can move it in there to do that. So now what would happen is you've got the mineral rights over here. You have the LLC set up here that's owned by the Corp, and it has the raw land inside of that LLC as follows. Now here's something you may not know. With land flipping, if you're flipping in multiple states, do you need to create the LLC in the state where the property is located? Well, for the most part, the answer to that is not necessarily. You could probably set this entity up in Wyoming and flip out of a Wyoming LLC and not have to worry about forming an Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Louisiana. And every time you're going into a different state to buy a piece of land, setting up a different LLC for that one parcel. Now, it's key here. You set up one LLC per parcel, and you're going to see why here in just a moment. So flipping land's similar to flipping real estate, but the difference is that when you're flipping land, you can get by with probably using a Wyoming LLC more so than you could with flipping individual homes. Okay, so now, creating multiple LLCs. Let's say I had 3 pieces of land. I would hold all 3 pieces of land in different limited liability companies. Now that mineral thing sits all off on its own. It's not tied into this company. That's my banking. I'm banking those minerals. I got a mineral bank LLC set up for that. So now I've got each of these parcels in here. If I sell this land off to this individual right here, he buys the land. The land's no longer held in the LLC. I get the cash in here. I distribute it to this company that I own, the LLC taxes an S or a C Corp. And so this is the entity that's either going to pay the tax on it or pass it out to me. Thing is that this LLC up here is a disregarded LLC, so it doesn't have to file a tax return. The purpose of that LLC is to provide asset protection. Taxes are only looked at here and here. I'm not looking at any taxes up here at the LLC land holding flipping level. This is purely protection for me against this individual here. Now, here's why this is important. You see, if you sold this property to him, and let's assume that this individual had big plans for it, that he was planning maybe to subdivide it out, and finds out that he cannot do that with this property. It's not subdividable into what he wanted to put on there. So then he turns around and he says, well, you told me that I could subdivide this property, that you'd already talked to the county, therefore I'm going to sue you. Now I would say, hey, wait, I never disclosed that. I never said that to you. I have disclosures here. Still, it doesn't protect you from being sued. He can still sue you to try to shake you down for money. And this is what happens, in my opinion, more often with land, is because people buy it with an expectation of how they're going to use it, or land use laws change during the time they've had it and it gets rezoned and they can no longer do what they want to do. So they feel like they got a raw deal here and they want to go back and they sue the seller. So by using the LLC in this manner, when you're done selling the property, shut the LLC down. So this guy comes looking for a company that's no longer in existence and he doesn't know who to sue. And so it really impairs the buyer's ability to go after you after the fact, because that LLC is now closed and it's been dissolved. Whereas a mistake that I see land flippers make is they'll set up a limited liability company. They'll have one entity there and they'll have multiple pieces of property in the same entity. This lawsuit hits and it ties up all this land. And it really then impairs their ability to grow their business, because now they're having to fight the lawsuit. Their assets are all tied up because the attorney tied them up with a Liz Pendens, and now they're stuck. But if you separate them out and you put one property per limited liability company, you can flip your property and then shut the deal down. And then so you're setting up a constant stream of LLCs. And that's why I'd probably set these up in Wyoming, because it's inexpensive to create your LLC in Wyoming. You can go out and buy property in Texas. You can buy it in New Mexico. You can buy it in Oklahoma in that LLC. You can strip the mineral rights out, put it in a different Wyoming LLC, make it your mineral bank LLC, and then sell the surface rights if that's what you're doing. So having the LLC set up like this, I think, is very important to provide protection for your overall cash flow. Now, one thing you may want to keep in mind as well, if you're concerned about anonymity and you don't want people to know that you're involved with the overall land sale, because you're working through an attorney and you don't want them to be able to look at the entity and see you, what you could do is this. If anonymity is important to you, set up a blocker entity right here. I call this a blocker LLC. This is set up in Wyoming. It's a Wyoming blocker limited liability company. So the sole member is your flipping entity down here, the tax entity, the tax LLC, S Corp, C Corp. That's going to be the main company, but it's going to own 100% of this Wyoming LLC up here. The reason why I'm going to do the Wyoming structure in this case is that my client's concerned about privacy, and they do not want anyone to look at a red box. For example, going back to my old structure, if I set this up and it's owned by this, what they could do is look here, right? Look at that LLC. They'll see this company here, and then they look at that and they see me down here because I'm all over that business. If you don't want that to happen, then what you'll do is you won't own it directly by your company. You'll set up a blocker entity here. So this blocker entity is owned 100% by your flipping LLC, is how I'm going to refer to this orange box. And then the blocker entity does this. It sets up all those separate Wyoming LLCs. Again, more Wyoming, more Wyoming, more Wyoming. And then this owns the land, just right up here. You own the land there. So you sell it out of here, shut the LLC down. Maybe this guy here is bought the land's not happy. He's looking around. He sees the Wyoming LLC was the owner of this red box that he bought it from. This tells him zero information. Doesn't find out any information on that. Because once you look at Wyoming, Wyoming doesn't collect any information on the members or managers. So if you want to flip property and you want anonymity, create a blocker LLC there. Again, so the whole purpose here in creating the structure is, one, you want to limit your liability exposure to the sale of this land. And more importantly, on the income you're generating from it, you want to avoid dealer status. And that's what the S Corp versus C Corp is going to do for you. By running the money through an LLC taxed as an S or a C, you won't be tagged as a dealer. So then you can control how that income's being taxed down to you. Best way I know of to flip land, especially that mineral bank there, stripping out those and just selling the surface rights. A lot that can go on there, a lot of opportunities when it comes to land flipping, but there's also risk. Be aware of it when you're creating your structures. Hey, if you want to learn more about how to set up the right business structures for your real estate investing, I teach a one-day tax and asset protection event for real estate investors. It's completely free for you to attend. There is a link in the show notes below. You click on that link, join me on my event, and I'm going to go into more in-depth on how to set up the right structures, LLCs, land trusts, corporations when it comes to real estate investing. More importantly, we're going to show you the tax side as well, because if you're an investor or you're a small business owner, there is a ton of money to be saved when using the Internal Revenue Code the right way. More importantly, I'm going to bring a team of attorneys and CPAs to that event with me. They're yours for the entire day. Take advantage of them. Ask them your questions. Get those tax questions, those asset protection questions answered, because this type of investing is not a one-size-fits-all approach. That's where you're going to get the answers. And I look forward to seeing you on my next event. Take care.